Episode 8 QCAT Podcast Tech, Cybersecurity, Smart Cities. Today we're here to talk about an interesting and for many people, including myself, quite confusing topic: legal issues, the legal industry, and how blockchain can work with this field. We're joined today by a special guest, Gerardo Huamán from Bitcoin Club Peru. Tell us about yourself, your blockchain experience, and your legal perspective as a lawyer.
I'm part of the legal department at Bitcoin Club Peru, where I help ensure that our organization follows all necessary legal guidelines and operates in full compliance with the law. I'm a lawyer specializing in civil law and practicing for 10 years. How did I get into crypto? By chance. I went to a blockchain event at San Marcos University about legal issues. Bitcoin was mentioned, but to me it was just a side note, and it even seemed a bit out of place. Then I found out that a colleague had joined a faucet. Those of you already in the crypto world will know what a faucet is. If you don't know, a faucet is a type of website where you can actually earn small amounts of crypto, satoshis, or even Bitcoin for free by completing certain simple activities or tasks. I discovered that she was doing this, and I realized this wasn't trivial. It impacted society. Then, I wanted to apply for a master's degree in civil and commercial law at San Marcos, bearing in mind that master's theses generally require a certain degree of innovation, especially in the legal field. You think you can't innovate in law? What if I talk about crypto? But I wanted to go a bit further. I wanted to see what would happen if we took crypto to the judicial level, not just as a rule regulating crypto. What would happen if crypto were the crux, or rather the center, of a legal dispute before the courts? Could the judiciary deal with it? Could it resolve it? At the criminal, civil, or employment level, how would it resolve it? Would there be any issues? Those were the questions of my thesis. In 2022, I realized there were crypto communities and needed to interview them, since I only knew them in theory. That's how I joined Bitcoin Club Peru.
Anthropological purposes.
Let's put it this way. The world of law has a practical side, which is generally what we see in films, although it's not quite as dramatic as we'd like it to be. And it also has its philosophical theoretical side, where at times it seems to exist in a cloud of ideas. We debate what property, legal acts, transfers, and contracts are, and if contracts are just paperwork. And in the end, your client doesn't care about any of that. They simply care that they're owed money and they want their money, full stop. But lawyers, and I don't know if anyone listening to the podcast is a lawyer, will know very well that within the Lima Bar Association, there are often theoretical debates, even in the corridors.
Well, so it was because of your master's thesis that you ended up getting involved in this crazy world and community, but a few years have already passed, because you said 2022, we're now in 2025, we've more or less moved past the pandemic, and the question that many people have, because this crypto world is growing exponentially, it's attracting a bigger audience, and now with everything going on with the Trump administration wanting to turn the US into a global crypto epicenter, the world's strongest economy wants to be the crypto hub. And the question those unfamiliar with this ask themselves is, how relevant is it? And now, moving to the legal side, we can talk about findings from your thesis, if you like. How relevant is blockchain in legal matters? And not just as a philosophical debate, but also because there are administrations that want to incorporate blockchain as a technology for their processes to digitize their procedures. There's blockchain in medical records, and so on. So, from a legal perspective, how can this blockchain be incorporated?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that blockchain isn't just about crypto. It's true that Satoshi Nakamoto's paper refers to a kind of blockchain as a decentralized system that allows transactions to be recorded, and depending on how it's used, it can even track transactions, make them more secure, and so forth. However, with Ethereum, the possibility of creating software known as smart contracts emerged. While it's true that, for some systems engineers, a smart contract isn't actually a contract, just ask a couple of people who are familiar with software coding and they'll tell you, no, for us, it's not a contract, it's just code, nothing more. What you see is nothing more than ones and zeros, and that's it. However, in practical terms, it carries a number of very significant implications. Firstly, a smart contract enables the automation of transactions. That is extremely powerful from a legal perspective. Why? Normally, when someone enters into a contract, there is always a prerequisite to the negotiation: trust. How do I know you'll actually comply? How do I know I won't have to take you to court? Or that I won't need to take extra steps to ensure my needs, those specific needs specified in the contract, are fulfilled, and that I won't have to spend more money to make sure those needs, or what was agreed in the contract, are actually met. The smart contract, since it automates the give and take, so to speak, is quite remarkable. You can, to a certain extent, suddenly remove notaries, arbitrators, and the courts from the equation, not entirely, but to some degree. Of course, it will always depend somewhat on the type of blockchain we're referring to, the kind of crypto asset involved, how it will be used, or the specific circumstances. Why? Because there are blockchains that were created purely for financial purposes, for example, XRP. There are blockchains that were developed with the aim, let's say, of protecting the environment or saving energy, such as Algorand. There are others that have focused more on interoperability, like Polygon, Polkadot, and so on. It will very much depend on what type of crypto asset, not just cryptocurrency, is being used, and how the dispute has come about. This will enable us to determine the precise relevance of the blockchain. For instance, if it is an administrative blockchain, it will depend greatly on the type of blockchain, whether a certain amount of fees or gas must be paid for transactions, or perhaps not. Maybe it is simply programmed to store information, and so on. It will depend on whether the blockchain is used as proof, or if it is meant to protect sensitive information like personal data. You will always need to consider the type of blockchain, the type of crypto asset, and the intended use for it.
So, we've seen that it is certainly important and highly relevant today, as there are various types of projects, countless blockchains, countless crypto assets, and each will have its own objectives, its own reasons for being created, and its own possible use cases. Each one, legally, is different, right? Depends on its use. Now, what we'd like to know is, within the legal sector, what technological requirements would a blockchain project need in order to be incorporated into the judicial system, whether for storing sensitive information or for data protection? What potential uses do you see?
Good question. Let's see. We're talking about how the blockchain ecosystem will interact with the legal ecosystem. First, we need to understand that, in Peru, there are already certain initiatives to implement blockchain in some areas. It was used during the pandemic, I believe, for what was intended to be the registration of vaccination credentials, if I remember correctly. There are already criminal cases involving experts who identify fraud related to crypto assets and carry out blockchain-based analyses. This is the case, for example, with the consulting firm Chainalysis, which has already worked with the judiciary and the public prosecutor's offices. The same applies to some wallets like Binance, which advise the government on how to understand blockchain. However, what does blockchain require from the legal industry? More than a legal framework, I would say it needs political will. Not to regulate the technology itself, but to start coordinating certain pieces of legislation so that there are no contradictions. There is a regulation that governs service providers for virtual assets, which are not cryptocurrencies, but purely virtual assets. However, This law already contains definitions and certain rights and obligations that those subject to it must follow regarding what they need to do to prevent money laundering and the financing of terrorism. It would be logical and reasonable for a rule of this kind never to contradict another rule, so, for the sake of clarity, let's assume it won't contradict any other. However, if there is a contradiction, let it be one that is straightforward and easy to resolve. So, what is needed? Firstly, a legal understanding of the technology and its impact, its significance. On a political level, there must be political will. Those in power need to understand what blockchain is and the possible use cases. There is one case that really stands out to me. In fact, there are two cases that I consider very important and powerful. One is transaction automation, as I mentioned earlier. The other concern involves providing support for public registries, or what we commonly refer to as real-world assets. Why is this significant? In the specific case of the Peruvian registry system, many ordinary people simply don't know how to properly register their assets. Many times, they have pre-existing issues that prevent them from registering and fulfilling the administrative procedure. Blockchain could help automate and simplify the registration of our assets through technology. This is very real. It covers buildings, real estate, aircraft, cars, and more. However, under the current legal framework, registering these assets requires certain formalities, otherwise the registration is null and void. In other words, if the legal requirements for registration are not met, the registration or transfer simply does not happen, full stop. There are certain rules that need to be changed at the registry and notarial levels, because I believe that certain conflicts would arise in applying the current rules when blockchain tries to make things more dynamic. Many people ask themselves, why do I need to complete this or that formality if I have blockchain? So, perhaps some changes to those rules to give legal effect to what is recorded on the blockchain would be important. But there's also another challenge, which is the issue of the land registry. It's important to understand that sometimes public registries are unaware that a particular property exists. There have been cases of land, of properties that have been there for years and are only just about to be registered. What? Tomorrow? There's a conflict there. The subject of transaction automation is very striking because we would be talking about automating or making contractual relationships more agile. However, what will happen if the smart contract is poorly drafted, or perhaps the legal effects arising from the inclusion of the smart contract could have negative consequences for third parties? How will this be dealt with at the judicial level? That's a challenge. Much work remains, and those are points must be addressed.
Well, we've already discussed different use cases in the legal world about what the legal industry finds interesting within blockchain. What if we tell you a bit about QCAT and the technology behind QCAT, which is a blockchain called WebChain, based on its own data infrastructure created by QCAT, Cyber Advanced Technology Incorporated, and this data infrastructure aims to replace the TCP/IP Internet Protocol. It's a new protocol, a series of millions of lines of code that make up what we call OTOCN, Operation Technology, Operation-Centric Network. What does this mean? It is a data infrastructure designed with operational optimization in mind, as it originates from the world of industrial Java to optimize factories and real-time processes where mission-critical operations are of utmost importance. Things must be executed in the millisecond needed, because otherwise failure could result in death, injuries, or catastrophes affecting an entire city. All of these technologies enable QCAT, as a cryptocurrency built on this blockchain native to this data infrastructure, to possess scalability, speed, and security that are genuinely unrivaled, without compromise. Because they are integral to this new protocol designed with these priorities in mind, it incorporates a hexagonal infrastructure, which means speed is not just an added benefit but something inherently fundamental. What might this mean in relation to what we've been discussing?
Well, From a legal perspective, when crypto and blockchain first appeared, certain challenges emerged, especially with Bitcoin. Why is that? With Bitcoin, in order to verify whether a transaction has been completed, to confirm the transaction, if I remember correctly, it takes around 10 minutes. 10 minutes from when a transaction was initiated to completion, A transferred Bitcoin to B. A blockchain that enables you to further automate the act of transferring value, what does it allow you to do? It removes that delay and the risk that, within those 10 minutes, the cryptocurrency could suddenly fluctuate from 1 to 1.5 or down to 0.3. So, that's one risk eliminated. Perhaps what QCAT is doing is finally eliminating this problem from now on. The crypto you send is exactly the crypto that will be received, and it will arrive very quickly, without the need to pay any fees at all. One way or another, you remove the validator or the miner, which is a significant blow to what Bitcoin represents, without a doubt. However, it remains to be seen how QCAT will perform in real-world scenarios when measured against other existing blockchains, and whether those other blockchains will actually be willing to compete with QCAT, since they would likely find themselves completely outmatched, particularly at the consumer level, where QCAT's advantages are most significant and apparent. And why is that the case? It's important to understand that crypto and blockchain were created with this idea of decentralization, both in terms of value and in the management of governance within the software. Depending on whether QCAT manages to satisfy the average consumer, and I would venture to say that with these features you've just mentioned, it will most certainly satisfy them, because there are simply no more nodes, no fees to pay, no transaction fees, or anything else of the sort. To a certain extent, this might satisfy a large majority. The big question is, how will the rest of Web3 perceive it? Because for Web3, in the crypto and blockchain worlds, the idea of decentralized management and governance is very important. And it depends on whether QCAT also manages to satisfy this sector, which may be a minority, but it is a minority that has created an entire culture, crypto culture. It remains to be seen how it performs in practice, and whether it addresses the problems faced by the average user. If it can solve these issues, that's already a very strong point, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the market, supply and demand. Cryptocurrencies and blockchain that enable us to solve the problems of ordinary people are simply bringing about a very significant social change. And the law simply has to adapt. Perhaps some of the risks or challenges that the law currently faces with blockchain could be eliminated. Perhaps with WebChain these risks wouldn't exist, based on what you've been telling me. And we'll have to see how it affects crypto culture, so we'll wait and see, because we need to see how it actually unfolds in practice first.
And for that conversation about the impact on culture and communities, we'll be discussing topics in an upcoming episode with Gonzalo Davalos. So that's it for today's episode. It's dense, those not used to hearing about legal topics, a conversation on things that matter but few know about. That's today's episode with Gerardo Huamán. Follow him in the description. Social accounts are there too. And that's it. See you in the next episode of the QCAT podcast. Bye.